Recognized for her results-driven leadership and counsel in building organizations into world-class top producers, she is Deputy Managing Director and shareholder at Falcon Corporation, a leading, wholly indigenous midstream and downstream energy, gas distribution, and trading company, which she co-founded in 1994. She is passionate about entrepreneurship in Africa and committed to actualizing the potentials of SMEs to become large corporations or multinationals. Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo is committed to building African institutions that can survive and scale sustainably and developing leaders and managers for these organizations who are global in their thinking and networks. Known as the Double Impact Coach, she is the founder and promoter of the Double Impact Platform, a business training and relationship building foundation for entrepreneurial couples in business together. Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo holds several master's degrees in finance, marketing, and business administration from the Lagos Business School, University of Nigeria, and Nnamdi Azikiwe University. She also holds several executive certifications in management, leadership, and governance from Harvard Business School, IE Business School, and the Wimborne Institute. She is married and a mother to 4 amazing young adults. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a kind welcome to Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo.
A very, very good morning to you all, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And let me say first and foremost, thank you to Pastor Tola Odutola, his lovely wife, and the Jesus House Baltimore family. Thank you for the honor and privilege to be on this platform once again. I was here last time and it was a phenomenal session. I truly appreciate that. So today I'm speaking on the perspective of leading in crisis. And that, I think, is a very timely topic. Now, the thing is, when we think about crisis, we realize that that's really the world we're in today. We are in an era that is characterized by uncertainty, by volatility, by disruption. And our ability as leaders to navigate those challenging times is really critical. And as you know, crises, they come in different forms. So and they've been like a constant companion of humanity. When we think about, history telling us about the bubonic plague of the 14th century, the financial crisis in the 21st century. I mean, as leaders, we just face a lot of things that demand us to be very resilient, adaptable, and innovative. Even in today's world, we have seen unprecedented global challenges like the COVID-19 issue, which we had to deal with. And that for many countries, we're still grappling a bit with the ripple effects of that. We are seeing a lot of geopolitical tensions and political upheavals. We are seeing climate crisis. We are seeing shocks and all sorts of natural disasters all over the place. And so it's testing the mettle of leadership and across how we run our lives and our organizations. But here's the thing, that these are actually not unexpected in a sense. When we think about it, the word of God itself actually tells us that there will be earthquakes, famine, pestilence. If we look in Luke 10, for instance, Luke 21, from verses 10 to 11, and I like the way it is put in the Amplified Classic Version. It says, when you hear of wars and insurrections, disturbances, disorder and confusion, do not be alarmed and panic. Don't be stricken and terrified, for all these must take place first, but the end will not come immediately, right? It says there will be, in verse 11, that there will be mighty and violent earthquakes, and in various places there will be famines, there will be pestilences, there will be plagues, there will be epidemic diseases that are deadly and devastating. There will be sights of terror, great signs from the heaven. We see this repeated again in Matthew 24:7. In fact, that actually tells us that, that this is just the beginning. These are the early pangs of what is called an intolerable anguish, again repeated in Mark 13 and verse 8. And of course, when we think about Revelation, that just gives us a very horrific picture of what the expectations are. And the truth is, we are in that place where this is unfolding right before our eyes. So whether we're looking at crisis from human factors such as negligence or greed, whether it's external factors like climate change, whether it's issues around technological disruptions, the point is that as leaders, effective leadership is the cornerstone then of that crisis management. We need to be skilled at this. We need to be compassionate. That is the reality we face today. So leadership in its purest form is actually not measured in, when times are all nice and good and everything is calm and, we're all prospering. But actually, we test leadership in the period of crisis. That's when we understand, in those moments of adversity, that you see the real metal that you carry. All right. So this is what we need to look at. And if we sit back and consider that into the future, we look at some of the things that are evolving, it tells us that we must be very intentional about how we run as leaders. We are seeing some emerging crises, cyber attacks, bioterrorism. We're seeing a lot of social upheavals. And even as technology is adapting, there's positive elements and negative elements to AI, to data analytics, and so on and so forth. So this is really now bringing it to you, the person as a leader. The time to test your mettle. What kind of leadership style do you have? What kind of competence? How flexible, how adaptable are you to different things? Listen, in the next few months, it will be 30 years exactly since we started our business. And I can tell you that we've been through so many things in the course of that period. I remember in 2014 when we had the oil industry, that global bust that happened. At that point in time, 50% of my business revenues were coming from EPC, that's engineering, procurement, and construction services. And suddenly there was nothing. And that nothing stayed like that for some years because the oil industry across the world, most of the construction projects where they just cancelled the budgets around that. Everybody was waiting to see what would happen as they grappled with the realities of low and even at some point negative oil prices. Okay. Every time a new government comes in, that transition creates shifts that have impacts for the industry. For my business in Nigeria, every time that governments have changed, people come up with new policies, with new programs, and they have either impacted us positively or negatively, or just caused a huge shift in the way we do business and have caused us to try to manage differently. Now, when COVID-19 happened, and I know many of us are still living with the reality of that, when the lockdowns happened for us, because we're a B2B type of business, suddenly we were at an absolute zero in terms of cash flow. And we had just kicked off a major project, a huge project worth billions of naira, and we couldn't even access our sites. And that's, when you're thinking of money counting that you've borrowed to do this project, wow, it was quite scary. It was looking at some point as though all our efforts of 27 years at that point in time was just going to be shut down, just like that. And even when we saw that the logistics, movement was now being opened up a bit more, we saw our end customers, their purchasing power was impacted. It affected our volumes and so on and so forth. Supply chains were impacted. That meant that even to get the things we needed to do, the jobs we needed to do, was difficult for us. We navigated through that. And then we had the Russia-Ukraine crisis. I can tell you that initially I watched that thinking it was something happening somewhere else, until it came to my doorstep, in the sense that one of my customers had to shut down. Why? Because their primary product was wheat, and guess who their primary supplier was? It was Ukraine. So again, on the domestic front, and I keep speaking from the Nigeria context because that's where my home business is, domestic challenges more recently in terms of we've been grappling with forex availability, the cost and the exchange rate, with the unification exercise that happened now, even compounding issues. And we have live projects with huge forex exposures that are running currently. Of course, the removal of the fuel subsidy, which I do support, that's not the conversation for today. However, the buffers that should have allowed for a more seamless transition were not in place. And so today we are trying to run a business in the face of escalating costs, escalating overheads, budget overruns, negative cash flow impacts, insecurity, and dare I say, manpower challenges. We know that for Nigeria, we are facing a huge exodus of our key talents, and that's impacting on our businesses. I believe this year I've lost at least 6 people. And this, mind you, these are things that are happening at the same time. So leading in crisis, in my view, is first of all a call for you to stay anchored in God. And yes, I know some people will say, oh, you want to spiritualize everything. No, no, no. Everything is spiritual. So let's start from there. In my view, anything that is in your hands to do, the businesses that I run, I recognize first and foremost as assignments. They are kingdom assignments. They are kingdom platforms. It is God that gave the vision. It is God that gave the wisdom. It is God that has orchestrated the trajectory of the business over almost 3 decades. It is God that has given the insights and the discernment to navigate the challenges. And therefore, first and foremost, when we think about leading with uncertainty, to me, I come back to the place of how anchored are you in God? It is in God that, first of all, you get the wisdom, you get the foundation, you get the insights to deal with those uncertainties and all the trials and tribulations that go with running a business in crisis. If we can be real, fear is actually a natural reaction during crisis. And there is a sense in which sometimes the world is almost or has convinced us that as leaders, we have to posture always as though we are strong and in control. No, we don't have to do that. We can be afraid. We can be afraid because we don't have all the answers. But there is a place that we can stand firm, and that is to stand firm on our faith that God has a promise to strengthen and to uphold us. And that's a source of comfort, is a source of empowerment. It reminds us that on the journey of leadership, especially in crisis situations, we are not alone. So during that COVID period, I remember, and these are, generally speaking, anchor scriptures for me as a business person. But there were some things that I used to just use to undergird my faith. I will remember, for instance, Isaiah 41 verse 10. It says, do not fear. I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. You remember, this is a God that says, I will harden you to difficulties. I like that scripture because it tells me that in that sense, he's telling me that when there are difficulties, he's the one that will give me capacity. In Isaiah 52 and 13, it says, behold, my servant shall deal wisely and prosper. He shall be exalted and extolled and stand very high. And every time I'm in a difficult situation, I remind myself, Lord, I am your servant. This is your word. I will deal wisely and prosper. For me to deal wisely, it means that I'm connected to the source of wisdom. Proverbs 24 and verse 3. Through wisdom, a house is built. By understanding, it is established. By knowledge, his rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. If you remember that we are made by God, we are built by him, we are God's house in essence. We need his understanding to, first of all, establish that purpose and then prosper in it. And when things are difficult, that is not a time to forget that. That is not a time. It's actually in those times of crisis that we need to remember that first and foremost, God is our number one source of counsel. The Proverbs 3:5-6, he said we should trust him with all our hearts and lean not on our own understanding, to submit all our ways to him and he will make our path straight. There is nothing that is more required in a crisis period than a straight path. Just trying to figure out, am I going this way, or this way? And only God gives us that. So it's not about over spiritualizing. It's facing the reality that you cannot do anything. You cannot succeed without going and anchoring steadfastly in he who is the end from the beginning God. And I want to say that again, the end from the beginning God, who already saw these things coming and he has already sorted them out. So the thing with economic uncertainties and crisis is that for those of us who run businesses, and especially those of us that run smaller businesses, they create this, unpredictability element, totally destabilizes us. Bad enough that small businesses, SMEs, we are especially vulnerable, already. There's a lot of businesses don't have enough resources or flexibility. And when things come, their consumer spending, their customer spending is impacted directly, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot happening. And as leaders, while we are standing front and center in such situations, remember we're also dealing with family issues. We're thinking about how all this is going to impact on our children. I mean, when COVID was happening, for instance, I had children that were schooling abroad at that point in time. So you're thinking of so many things. You're thinking about their health. Are they going to be okay? You're thinking about the school fees. Where's the money going to come from? And so on and so forth. But here's the thing. Leadership sets the tone. It sets the tone for how the business will navigate the uncertainty. We are the ones that still have to create that framework that will inspire confidence in our people. We are the ones that still need to provide direction. We are the ones that need to keep our teams motivated, to keep them informed. And I think that when we think of all the many moving parts in a crisis situation, is to remind ourselves that, you know what? Leadership under crisis, in my view, is a template that we're given by God. Think about this. Why was Jesus sent? Because the world was in crisis, it was breaking down. He came to save. And that's the model. We are his ambassadors in the first place. So, whenever there is a crisis situation, those of us that God has given the gift of leadership, we are the ones he has also positioned as the solution providers. Leadership under crisis is about capacity. It's about the capacity you already carry and the capacity that will be built by the situations and circumstances that I promise you will stretch you. They're going to stretch you mentally, physically, emotionally, and prayerfully. They should be stretching you spiritually as well, because for me, the spiritual always takes a priority in everything. So leadership is that point in crisis is about dealing with you really. It's about starting from the perspective of self leadership. You can't give what you don't have. And the thing is that if you manage yourself properly, if you then manage the crisis situation within your business properly, you can build such a high level of trust and confidence, that a higher level than ever before in your people. And then, of course, more resilience in the organization. So we start by looking inwards, trusting God. When we're in crisis modes, it's easy for us to feel overwhelmed. Uncertainty is a reality, right? And that's why I said, like I said, we need God, we need his wisdom. But we are human beings too. We can be afraid, we can be unsure, we can be overwhelmed, we can be uncertain. And everyone is looking for us to provide solutions. So self-leadership is key. Being able to manage yourself. Self-care is critical. When you are also someone that is able to showcase that you're looking after yourself across these various parameters, you are setting an example also for your team. What you don't want in a crisis situation is group burnout, where everybody is like, oh, because my boss is, oh, she's always on the go, 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 go. Ah, if madam can do it, I can do it too. And then all of you are just pretending that you are not being overwhelmed by the situation. You can have group burnout. When you have group burnouts, there's also going to be phenomenal catastrophic mistakes that can be made. So you want to, in a crisis, make decisions that are the right decisions. Even though you are under pressure, you want your heart, your mind, your whole essence to be calm and composed enough, because there's an undergird of something that you can then make the right sets of decisions. And I repeat that this doesn't mean that you're going to come and be presenting a front as though you are totally in control. That, in my view, is a bit inauthentic. But in the face of chaos and uncertainty, while people are looking to you to guide for guidance, there is a way in which you would have, taken care of yourself, backed by your faith in God and backed by so many other things I'm going to talk about. And that then helps you to get a clear pathway while you're dealing with the crisis. Panic, it tends to be contagious. So if you give in unduly to panic, you create a system of overwhelm. We don't want a leader that is panicking. Remember, I said we set the tone. We want to be decisive in our actions. We have to make the tough decisions, even if they're unpopular. And so there's real pressure, but it's not pressure we can succumb to. How do you then deal with that? So beyond the elements of looking after yourself, one of the things that is important, especially in a crisis situation, is that you have a surround, that is a support system. Listen, if you're a business leader, you don't have a coach, you don't have a mentor, you don't have some kind of accountability circle, you are already setting yourself up to fail when a major thing hits. You must have those kinds of systems that allow you to distress, that allow you sound counsel, that are safe space. Leading under crisis is not a time to be a superhero. You need that place where you can go and express the extent of your weaknesses and then get, courage as people pour into you as well. The Bible does say that in a multitude of counselors, there is wisdom. So you need that coach, a mentor, an accountability circle. You need that. You also need a very strong level of interaction with, if you have them, your board of directors, your shareholders, the consultants that work with your business. Crisis times are not times to say, you start cutting off all your concerns. Reason, especially if they've added value in the past, is the best time to get people that can stand outside and give you a detached view of what is going on in your business and help you to think through. It is a time when you need to reach into your peers and your trusted advisors to find counsel, find that support. You yourself cannot afford to be lost in the process, and you will not be lost if you have the right surround. So the thing then also with the crisis situations is that sometimes they they make you question your vision because the world is in such a constant state of flux. We have to flow with the ebbs and tides, and sometimes though the kinds of things that hit are such that there was no way we could have anticipated them. And if we look at our vision, sometimes it's almost like we are not sure we'll ever get to this. But in a crisis situation, you have to elevate your thinking. All right. We want to make sure that we keep the central issue, that we stay on course. So there are questions you have to ask yourself. And I always recommend don't ask them alone. When I say ask yourself, I actually always talk about engaging your people. I believe so much in the power of your people. Ask yourself, do we need to tweak anything in the vision so that we will ultimately pass this situation, come to the place of another alignment with the original vision? What might need to shift? And are we talking about times a policy can, literally kill your industry, or a competitive move somewhere can just throw you completely off course? So do you need to shift entirely, or just do we need to create a specific, let me use the word still, vision for getting past this crisis? And as the business leader, in a time of crisis, you are the one that has to then anchor whatever vision you up with and create that compelling story for how you're going to navigate the crisis. And it helps when you have taken the inputs of your people, because when you are then able to articulate that narrative, they can also see themselves in the process and they can see themselves in the win. I believe we should always be looking for how to work with our teams to see themselves in the win. Now, when you have that vision, that picture of what needs to happen to navigate the current situation you're dealing with, you have to then set your priorities. Like, what are the most important things that we have to do? What resources do we have to do that? Is there anything that may be time bound? Are there legal constraints around the things that we need to do? Do we need added resources? Are we going to need to engage, outsource something? What kind of models are we going to use to make these things happen? And whatever is decided, communication is going to be key. When we're leading during crisis, we cannot afford to keep everything in our heads. No, we want to make sure that we're talking to our people in a very open and honest way, even when the situation is dire. I believe that people are fundamentally extremely intelligent, and when you can sell them a hard story, if that's what is your reality, with honesty and transparency, they will be part of the solution because there is a buy-in. So communication is one of the key things that we need to do when we find out this mode. We can't afford to leave our people wondering what on earth is going on. So I remember during that whole COVID debacle, like literally we had to have town halls where we put all our cards on the table. This is the reality. This is how the business is looking. This is what the impact is. And we really need to collectively think through the things that need to happen for us to get past this situation. So communication is key. You cannot succeed without your people. Remember that in any crisis, one of the things that is very common to crisis situations is that there are many, many moving parts. There are many agitations to the things that are status quo. And of course, there are some things you can control, but there are many that are going to be external to you, or perhaps even unintended consequences internally that you find yourself grappling with. So in the middle of all that is going on, you are thinking many things with your people. What options are open to us? You're going to be having conversations about how can we diversify our revenue streams. We had to do that in a situation where it looked like all the cash flow stopped. What else can we do? Do we need to go into a different industry? What are the opportunities that are available? Remember, in that time, the word was pivot, pivot, pivot. What else can we do? What new markets can we do? What can we take online? We're thinking about things like cost reduction. Where can we save money? Where can we put in, new efficiencies into the system? Do we need to look at our contracts and renegotiate them? How do we optimize our industry inventory? How do we reduce our overheads? And then trying to evaluate which one of these is a step that we should take at this time, or which one might just be something reactive that we may regret in the long run. We have to settle down and run different scenarios around the businesses, create different plans. What might be the outcomes? What might happen in the economy? How might we have to respond to this? And so on and so forth. So at this point in time, and the reason I've taken time to create that basket of examples of the many moving parts that happen in crisis is the point I want to make, that, like I said, you can't succeed without your people. And that means that leading in crisis places a higher imperative on us to be actively listening to what our people are saying, and listening from the perspective of, allowing things that we have previously not considered as options to come to the fore, and be willing to trust some of the suggestions they are bringing, even if it's not what we ordinarily would have done. We have to be able to invite solutions and suggestions from our people. One thing about crisis leadership is that there are no solo champions. It's not a time for you to, you want to be the one that is shining. No. If you've heard this expression before, that if you are leading and no one is following, you are taking a walk, then it should also inform the fact that during a crisis, if you seem to be the only one that is shining, the only source of ideas, the only one who has any initiative whatsoever, honestly, you are on a very solo journey, and that is not leading. Even Jesus had his disciples. If our Lord and Master needed the 12, then I promise you that we need our people. And in crisis times, it is critical for us to pay attention. In listening to our people, we then also have to listen with excuse me, emotional intelligence. Yeah, because remember that, as I said earlier, even for us as leaders, we are grappling with many things around the business, and then thinking about how it affects us and affects our people. But beyond the people we see in the office, is to remember there's an entire ecosystem that each of them carries. Every one of them is a husband, a wife, a daughter, a son, a brother, a sister. They are dealing with many things. So in the middle of the crisis, we have to remember that they themselves are dealing with things, and be sensitive to how we engage, to how we listen. And in the crisis mode, we cannot stay on stock. You can't, as a leader, be focused on this is the way we do it. That's one expression I totally just dislike hearing. Yes, there is a place for structure and systems, and I'm a great advocate of that. But there's a place for an adaptability element when there is a problem on the table. So, as leaders in crisis situations, in engaging with our teams, we must be open to new and innovative concepts. Things are very different. The kinds of decisions that we would have taken to gain ground may not be what is required in that season. And I want to just touch on the Bible a bit. In Judges, remember in Judges 4 to 5, we have that whole experience between Barak and Deborah. Remember Barak, I mean, mighty general. He was supposed to go and fight the armies of the Canaanite king of Jabin. And he said to Deborah, he said, no, I will not go unless you go with me. I mean, think about it. This is a well-respected general, somebody that has fought and won many battles. And he came to a point where he looked at the situation at hand, and he was like, this one, we need a different strategy. He was not saying, I can't go, but he was saying that I think that my victory lies in your strength. My victory lies in the wisdom, Deborah, that you will give me and partner with me on along this journey, right? I need that wisdom, wise counsel on this pathway if victory will be assured. And guess what? This was him saying that even if it will come from a woman, if we remember those times, he was saying that if we have to do something different, he gave up in a sense his ego, his that whole persona of what he had been seen as, to make sure that there will be victory. And this is how we must also position and posture in crisis. It's not about, oh, I'm the one who got the great idea. No. It's about opening yourself to say that if in this season somebody else in my team, or some team within my whole organization seem to have a better sense of direction, let's go with them so that we can ensure the victory for everyone else. Now, time is running out, so I want to say something, that leading through crisis actually starts before the crisis starts. And this is really about each of us that is running organizations doing our best to make sure that we are building resilient organizations, because a resilient organization is one that can more readily withstand and recover from crisis. So it is really about the kinds of measures that we would take and put in place before the crisis. Although, dare I say that in today's world, crisis is the status quo. Recently, the United Nations General Assembly held, and there was something the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said. He said, and I quote, "Our world is becoming unhinged. Geopolitical tensions are rising, global challenges are mounting." And then he said some other things. And then he said that in the middle of all this, we are also trying to manage many different chaotic transitions. I'm sure that that sounds as real to you as it does to me. So, if we recognize that what we are seeing now is our norm, and remember, I gave you some scriptures earlier that shows that it is also in the word of God that we should expect some of those things. So geopolitical challenges and tensions are not a thing because Secretary General said it, or because the different heads of government sit down and discuss it. They're a thing because it's in the Bible, because God knew it was going to happen. What that means, therefore, is that we must be ready. That means that crisis preparedness is part of your requirement as a leader before you get to crisis, and more so now that every day is looking like a crisis. So, how do we proactively plan? How do we, when you're thinking about your business, you don't go into one year with just the one scenario. And if you've been doing that before, you need to change that. You need to spend some time troubling different scenarios. When we do our budgeting, for instance, within my organization, we do different simulations. So you may now have the board approve a base case budget, but we have the different simulations we have run. If this turns out like this is what it may look like. And these are the necessary adaptations we'll have to make. Maybe these are some projects we'll have to suspend and so on and so forth. Or maybe we were supposed to do some hires. We will now push them further down the line if this plays out, if the other one plays out, and so on and so forth. So you must be able to develop your own, think about the vulnerabilities within the business that you run and try to identify and develop response strategies to ahead of their happening. It makes you better prepared. If you are running an organization, there are some key, what we call the business playbooks, that must be in place. You want to be sure that you have a business continuity playbook. You want to be sure that you have an emergency response playbook. You want to be sure that you have a disaster recovery playbook and a crisis management playbook. But here's the thing, it's not just about having those things in place. If you can also run simulations every once in a while, just make like a crisis just happened and our business is shut down, we don't know what to do. If you follow that playbook, test it to know whether your staff, your people, and yourself, whether you have a live system or as distinct from just having a document or a process manual that is somewhere on the shelf, right? Build your crisis management teams, those dedicated people that have a set of clear protocols to do one, two, three, ABC if a crisis is to hit, and have them run their simulations before there is any crisis. Let each one understand their roles and responsibilities. Create deputies for every position, and that way you are not also, creating what we call key man risk within your crisis response teams. The better developed your business systems and structures are, the more adaptable and resilient your business is. That's a given. At the same time, though, you must be flexible because you don't want to be so bureaucratic that it will now overwhelm all your crisis management efforts. What this means, therefore, like I said, is before the crisis starts and in our reality today, let's make sure that we're building capacity in our people, that we're training and we're developing our leaders, but more importantly, that we are giving them the space to take the responsibility to act. As long as you're a business leader and you are the alpha and omega, who, believe me, is only God in the real sense of it, then there is a problem in your organization. And I believe a few of the speakers who spoke yesterday, have touched about this. We need to give people room. When we go through any form of crisis, then it's also important for us to step back and begin to assess a few things. What do we learn from this? What did we learn as an organization? What did we learn as individuals? What did you learn as a leader? What went well? What could you improve? What are our lessons that we can take and institutionalize, so that next time, even if it's a different kind of crisis, we are better prepared, right? What did we do to recover? What worked and what didn't work? And it's going to be a long process when some of the kinds of things we deal with happen. Like I said earlier, many of us are still grappling with coming back to pre-COVID types of performance, or pre-COVID types of different things. Our systems have been shaking. Then there is also the element of rebuilding trust if it's in the government, trust if it's with your shareholders, if it's with your staff. And I say that because sometimes in crisis, even though I always pushed for that not to be your first or even second response, sometimes in crisis we are constrained to start to do things like let people go. Is that bad? And then for those that stay, even though they stay and they're glad they didn't get kicked out, there is a bit of a trust deficit that has been deposited in the system. Find out, what do we do in trying to rebuild the operation that worked well? How do we document and institutionalize this? And then the emotional, psychological well being of our teams. How did we address that? What worked? What didn't work? What kinds of things can we then put in place as we continue on the journey, such that we have more rugged and resilient teams, well bonded teams, self driven, self motivated teams, that even ahead of anything, they themselves are already thinking, how can we create, those kind of hedges that prevent any huge impact on the business? Excuse me. Of course, like I said earlier, we also have to be thinking about the future crises that are ahead of us and how we position. That's part of our mandate as leaders. So, where is the world going? What are some of the things that are happening? When we're thinking about climate change, what's my role in that? How do I make my business more energy efficient? And things like that. ESG is a big conversation. How am I positioning to be part of that? What elements of my business align with the objectives of the sustainable development goals, for instance? How do we want to deal with cybersecurity? Are we prepared for cybersecurity? What do we need to put in place at this point in time within budget and whatever other constraints that you have, to make sure that you are not exposing your business unduly? Do we want to change some of the ways that we work with technology, so that we create those buffers that don't allow people to penetrate our systems and hold us to ransom, and so on and so forth? How do we put early warning systems in place, and how do we monitor those systems to be sure that they are actually working? These are things that we take out of any crisis experience we've had, and then reposition our systems to then prepare us for the going forward. My people, as leaders, like I said, our reality is we will set the tone. People will be looking to us for solutions. We must look after ourselves, so that we are in the best state of mind, of body, and of spirit, to then move the herd forward in a positive trajectory. At the same time, we want to be sure that we are not overwhelmed. So we stay open and authentic to receive help from those that God has positioned all around us to give us help. We are not the bastion of all knowledge. We are not the bastion of all wisdom. Leading through crisis is a formidable task, but it's actually critical. It's one of the most profound challenges that any leader can face. And it becomes, in the context of today's world, our norm, right? So vision is required, courage is required, empathy is required, critical listening skills are required, and an unwavering commitment to the well-being of your people and of the business. Adaptability, like I said. So you can't predict when the next crisis will arise, but you can prepare in a certain way. You can prepare the organizations to be able to respond better with more resilience and strength. So let's remember that our actions during times of crisis have a broad impact on the lives of those that we serve. And I mean those within your organization, your employees and their families, that ecosystem I spoke about, and all your stakeholders. We in my company, for instance, we talk about the fact that we see our gas business as a service to the nation of Nigeria first. And we mean that everything we do is adding into the buildup of the infrastructural base, is adding to the build-up of the energy sector is creating employment. We're transforming lives. We're transforming so many things. So we see that as our contribution. Therefore, anything we're doing in a time of crisis, we must keep that big picture in view, that the actions that we take will either be serving or doing a disservice to that broad overarching objective, which is the assignment that God has placed in our hands. All right. So I pray that in the things that I've said, they give you a kind of compass for how you should position and posture as a leader during crisis periods. Remember that your capacity is not in yourself, your capacity is in God. And God has put all of Himself in you, first and foremost, to be able to lead in the difficult times and in the times that are easy and thriving. But He has also resourced you with people who carry a different kind of capacity to undergird you. There's a reason why Moses' father-in-law was telling him that the way you are going, you will kill yourself. You have to bring those that will help you share the work, share the burden of leadership, which is the theme for this great leadership conference, is that you share with those that God has resourced you with. I want us to look at James 1 quickly. James 1 verses 2 to 4 that says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith will produce perseverance. And then let perseverance finish its work so that you will be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Crisis, remember, I started by saying it is actually a test of where you are in God. Is your God capacity on display? Is a test of your faith and your resilience. So you are not supposed to be discouraged and overwhelmed. It's actually, in a sense, and I know it sounds funny when you're dealing with big things like how do I even pay salary, but it says we should rejoice because it's an opportunity for personal and spiritual growth. If you are anchored firmly in God, you cannot come out of a crisis the same way that you went in. It's impossible. It's impossible. You come out with spiritual depth. He will show you things. He's the writer of the vision. He's the one that gives you dreams in the night. He's the one that if you go to bed asking him to give you specific solutions to the challenges you face, he's more than able to do that, right? So we do that. And personally, you build capacity in so many ways. I won't repeat that. So you have to look at crises as opportunities for us and our teams to develop and to transform. I'm going to end by saying this. Let's remember something. As business people, God gave us a mountain that is critical to the well being of nations. The space of enterprise and entrepreneurship is critical to the advancement and well being of the nations and people of the world. And we are sent to those places on assignment to be light and to be life. Those of us who are believers in the marketplace, our assignment is very different. And we cannot allow the crisis to throw us out and release the efforts we have made back to the kingdom of darkness. Matthew 5:16 is my undergird. It says, "Let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." In any crisis situation, it gives us an opportunity to be light in the darkness. If all you can do is to give empathy, show compassion to your people, and make real the love of God in a crisis situation, it is light. It is our opportunity to exemplify God, His values of love, kindness, selflessness, and to show that we have the heart of a servant, which is the way our own God came. I trust that this has been useful to you, and I look forward to the question and answer session. Let me end it where I started. It's about you in God, your journey in God, and the end must be such that God will be glorified. So I want to thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity of this conversation. And like I said, looking forward to your questions. God bless you.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Mrs. Joe-Ezigbo. This has been great. And for me,
Thank
the
you.
practicality of the sessions that we've had at GLC 2023 have been amazing. There are things that you can use real time and you can take and actually start using from tomorrow or from today, So we're really grateful for the insight that you've provided and the real life situations that you've also provided that at least allows us to be able to relate with the scenarios that you have preferred at this time. So thank you again so much. We have
Excuse
questions
me.
for you. You think that you delivered such an amazing session, but we still do have questions, and we want to know a little bit more. And questions have poured in, and we want you to please help us address some of this. Now, where I'm going to start from is this. You said leaders have to be prepared for crisis, because right now you said crisis is our God capacity on display, right? But leaders are human beings, and human beings have human tendencies. So there's a tendency to make a mistake, right? So there are some mistakes that leaders will make during crisis. Can you share with us probably a mistake that you have made or two, and how to mitigate these mistakes going forward?
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, you're so right that leaders, we are humans. And I think I've tried to speak to this a lot, to say that there's no solo champions, no, I got it all covered. We have to show that we don't know. We have to show, I believe that your authenticity also lies in your ability to say, I don't even know what to do right now. Let's all think about this and pay attention when people are speaking. Sometimes as leaders, when people are speaking, we are so busy thinking of what we want to say that we're not really listening. So mistakes, I don't know, 30 years, there are so many of them. Okay, so I can give one example, for instance, and that is it had to do with a it was a patient, right? Now, when you have, because when it comes to people, every experience is not positive. So in this case, now having a situation where we have someone who is proffering some solution that seemed to be practical, but you had maybe because it was a more senior person. But this is someone who had previously, we've been having some complaints in terms of behavioral leadership style. And at that point in time, making the decision to go with that decision in spite of some of those things that were already a source of concern, like does this person really have our DNA, right? And ultimately, seeing the fallout of that was not good. We also had now people wanting to resign, insofar as this is the person that is driving this, then I don't want to be part of this. And you have to circle back. And the messaging that we realized then, it was almost like saying that the senior managers are untouchable. That was what we realized we ended up signaling. So people are complaining about this. Nothing had happened about this yet. That person comes up with a proposal which not really accepted by everyone, and you choose to go with that. So what we signaled was, okay, this is a golden calf that is not to be touched. And by the time we had, in fact, I remember one of my key engineers who I heard he resigned, and I had to call him and say, what's going on? So in that process, got to find out a lot of other things. And I said, no, if the sense is now that, oh, it's because of this, and so it means everyone at my top level is protected, no. So we did a bit more of an investigation, found out a few things behaviorally. There was just a gross erosion of culture and values. And so we let him go. And of course, you have to have a town hall and address that situation. You eat your humble pie and acknowledge you didn't do the best you could have done, and we move forward. And I think people are ready to forgive if you can admit, your mistakes. I believe, if you feel that as a boss, you can never say, I do apologize, then there's something very wrong.
Wow.
Yeah.
Vulnerability for a leader is actually attractive to the people that you lead. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you very much. We appreciate that. There's another question here. And this is, you talked about, bless you, man. You talked about fear. Fear is
Mhm.
usually a natural reaction. Whenever there is crisis in an organization, you find out that there are, complaints, murmuring, a lot of grumbling going on, a lot of people trying to understand what's going on. What are you hearing from the top? People are talking at the water cooler, and everybody's trying to find out where do I fit within the situation that the organization is going through right now. And so
Mm,
fear is a
mhm,
real thing. So the question that I have is, how do you prioritize which issues to address first when multiple, or maybe no, let me change my question. Let me change the way I want to ask that question. How do you maintain team morale? How do you maintain team morale um, at a time when people are talking and people are talking about, do I need to leave this organization at this time? Does it look like this
mhm,
organization is solid enough to be able to still absorb me as an employee? How do you get them to focus on solutions rather than the problems that they are seeing? And you're
mhm.
the leader, so you need to kind of guide and steer that ship in a way where it includes everybody, all the employees. I hope my question was clear enough.
Right. Yeah, so sorry about that. Yeah, so that's a very good one. That's a very good one. Now, here's the thing. First and foremost is to recognize, like I said, every individual has a lot of things going on in their own lives. They're grappling with many things. And I think sometimes as employers, we may forget that. No matter how your people love the organization is not their life.
Wow.
The organization is not their life, it's a part of it. It's an ecosystem. Some of them are dealing with parents who have cancer or
Mm.
siblings. Some of them are, I mean, I can paint a million scenarios. I remember, and I'll get to your question. I remember several years ago, maybe about 16, 17 years ago, I had a lady who was heading one of my departments. She was fairly new, always on the job, totally in control, and very agile. I mean, I loved it because she was also a female engineer, and I love when I see we don't have them like that, so many. So she was totally in control. I loved it, and I remember one day it was the company's. I'm not sure what anniversary it was. We always try to do something with our staff on the day on June 4th. So that day we went out for a movie and then to go for, there was a restaurant we had arranged and all that. And immediately we came out of the movie, she picked her phone, she was smiling, and then suddenly she screamed and threw herself on the floor. And she was screaming and screaming. I grabbed her, I held her. What's going on? What's going on? And it turned out that her mom had been doing she had cancer. She had been struggling with cancer of the this, cancer of the that, all sorts of things. And finally the chemo failed and she packed up. So they just called her to say her mother was dead. I tell you the thing that got me the most, that this lady was coming to work fully. There was no day I saw her crying, nothing. She was always bubbly, very pleasant lady, but she was dealing with this. Let's remember that our people have their own issues. Now, when there is a crisis and they're not sure what's going to happen in the organization, yes, there are
Mhm.
just some people who are just grossly disloyal to everything. They have no stake in anything. Let's not assume everybody is like that. For some people, when they start to have the conversations around, oh, I might have to leave, maybe I should be looking for somewhere else, is because they are looking at their ecosystem and thinking, I am the breadwinner in my family. If this ship goes down with me in it, the implications, I can't pay school fees for my younger ones. My parents are, so it's not always about, oh, they just want to leave because you're in a difficult place. If we wear that cap, it allows us to be more empathetic in how we engage. So, regardless of what you're hearing, and it's always good when you have a system where you get to filter the water cooler conversations, but your
Yeah.
response is what then matters. Your response, if it's now just a case of, oh, these ungrateful people, this, that, you yourself, you
Mhm.
have a problem. So I
Hmm.
think it's about pulling people into a town hall, sharing some of the issues you've heard without naming names or trying to shame anyone, and allowing people to talk. One of the things that I did in my organization at some point was to stop attending the staff meetings. We used to do that as one big family. So I said, you know what? I sense that sometimes there are issues that people want to discuss that are difficult. Let's stay out of it so they can talk freely. And then
Hmm.
the HR is able to filter those things and bring back to us, and we find solutions to some of those things. Even when we see things that we feel are unreasonable, how do you respond to it to still communicate? That's leadership. You don't just lose your cool and get petty.
Wow.
Communication, communication, communication.
Open communication. You talked about open communication. You talked about critical listening. And somebody is saying, how do you listen and really hear what your teams are saying and the
Mhm.
members, the people you're leading are saying? And can you share a little bit about how you have applied that, something practical that they can use concerning critical listening? Because there's a tendency when we're having somebody speak to us, that we already either say we know where they're going with this, or we know what we want to say to address what it is, and we're not really listening to hear what they're saying
Excuse me.
from their hearts. How would you,
Mhm.
for a young leader, how can they develop that critical listening skill?
Well, I tell you what, I believe in training. We learn. If you know that, and you would know already that you are not a good listener if you are paying attention to things that people have been saying. You don't suddenly not become someone who can listen. You would have been that person, right?
Hmm.
So, yes, you would have been. And if you're a good listener, you would know you're a good listener. So, if it's something that you recognize is a gap, training helps. And I think as leaders, we must open ourselves up to training. I find it hard to understand when business leaders feel that because you've attained a certain height of success, that there's no training that is required anymore. And I get that all the time when I tell people I'm going for a program. It's like, ah, madam, you? No, yes, me, because I was raised by a father who said, the day you stop learning is the day you die. I'm also in my 50s. I'm not a young woman anymore. And I recognize that the world is changing rapidly
That's
around me. I don't want to become a dinosaur still coasting in my madamness, whereas the world has moved past me. So, training is one way. If you are a young person, a young leader, and you feel this is a gap, organize an
right.
active listening training for the entire organization and then test it. Are you listening when people are saying things to you like, oh, I told you, oh, you didn't understand? Then ask people, what do you really
Mm.
mean? And when you also design a system whereby you don't just what's the word now, when you want to communicate a proposal, it's not just a case of, oh, just throw it out there. No, do some, put it together. Why would we want to do this? What are the upsides to this? What do we require to make it happen? What are the potential downsides? How do we obviate or navigate around them so that this is still a workable win for everyone? If you communicate like that and encourage your people to do that, and if there's I don't want to get lost in data. I think sometimes we overanalyze, but some data usually helps too. And that's an easier way to listen because you're now, one of the things I like to do is to pull my teams together. Let's discuss this together. That way you're seeing
Mhm.
different perspectives. If you're a business owner and you're in a meeting with your teams and there's something being put forward and you seem to be the only one that is not getting it, you need to kind of, yeah, that it's not them, it's probably you.
Attention.
And not
Yeah.
getting it doesn't mean, or if you get it, it doesn't mean you will run with it. But if you don't get it at all, I promise you, it's probably you. So training is the thing, and don't stay in your I'm the business leader, so I don't need to, or I don't know how to listen actively, and that's just how I am. What do you mean by that? My pastor, and I heard Pastor Stola say this something similar. My pastor, Pastor Godman Akilabi, he said last Sunday that some of you be saying that's just how I am. Are you Alpha and Omega, the one that changed not? You are not. You are not.
Nobody is, except the Alpha Omega himself, right? Nobody is. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you. I have a question here. How do you deal with the pressure of crisis? The pressure
Mm,
of crisis. So we've talked about the leader being proactive, the leader being, at a time of crisis, being able to set the tone, right? But the
mhm,
leader, again, going back to the fact that the leader is human,
mhm,
and you're stressed in this time
mhm,
of crisis. How
mhm,
do you
mhm.
deal, whether mentally, emotionally, physically, with the pressure of crisis?
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. So pressure is real. It's a part of life. And the difference is that when you are the one sitting on top of an organization as a leader, where everybody is looking up to you, it can seem to be a lot more. There are other pressures that we may not quite realize we're grappling with, but they're there in terms of, our ego, for instance. You don't want to fail. This is what you have done and built, and if this falls around you,
Mm.
where do you start? So there's so many things that we are dealing with at the same time, and sometimes those are even bigger pressures than the actual situations themselves. So,
Right.
I said something, and I truly do believe this. The starting point is, where are you with God? Where are you? He's your peace in the storm. There's that place where,
Wow.
I mean, for me, I can lose myself in worship. I don't want to think about anything else. Let's just start from there, and there's a peace around it. As simple as sitting down. For me, what I do is, I just, first of all, start at just sitting down with worship music around me and a hot steaming cup of coffee. I don't want to think. I just want to be in his presence. Start from there. What is God saying? And all that. But yes, it doesn't mean that it disappears. No, it doesn't work that way. But I think there is a steady state wellness and peace that has to first
Mm.
happen inside, and that only comes from fellowshipping, and just dwelling in God's presence. For me, first. Second thing I said is this: you can't do this alone. So who is your surround? Who is your surround? In our organizations, we are it's a pyramid, and we are at the top. So we are the biggest fish in the pond. Where is your other pond where all of you are similar size fishes, or where you are one
Wow.
of smaller ones, so that you have those ones you can look up to? There are people you can sit down with and ask, can I have an hour of your time in that kind of a space? Can I have an hour of your time? I have a situation. Or if you are part of leadership mastermind groups, for instance, of which there are many of those such leadership accountability circles, and you bring your issues to the table, people trouble them with you. Sometimes just sharing that, even if you didn't get a solution, has a way of, tampering your stress. And then of course there is self-care. That we can't take that away. Quite frankly, it may seem like a silly thing, but maybe we ladies are better at this. You go to the spa, go out with your girlfriends, have a nice meal and laugh, and your problem is still waiting. But you have to find the different things that kind of, make you realize that this is not all that there is. Your solutions will come from the counsels around you. If you are too stressed and you don't find some ways to open up, do you know you can't even receive? You
That's
can't
right.
even receive. You are under
Very
too
true.
much pressure to think. And then lastly, I will say on this same issue that the pressure is less when it is shared. That's, I repeat, if you have people, and I know not everybody does, but if you have people that you have the capacity to pull together in your organization, they work for you, yes, but they are part of it. Their destinies at this point are tied to what is happening. Bring them in and allow them carry this with you. Don't try to do it all by yourself. Why must you be the one that wins? Why? So
Wow.
let's share as much as we can. It really helps. It really helps.
So it's not enough because I'm the boss to be the one that wins, but I'm the boss.
No. Well,
I was just teasing.
yes. I know,
Yeah.
but here's the thing, like the boss of what, really?
Hey,
The
I guess
boss of
that's the
what?
question. I
Mm.
really am supposed to be the boss of people, aren't I? And these
What
people
is
add
your, what
value
is what is
to the
your what's your
organization.
core
Yeah.
what's your core mandate? What's the
Right.
real essence of your life? So if God
Okay.
stripped this organization for you, then the boss of what are you? What's the mandate?
Wow. Okay, so that's deep. And that's really, food for thought.
Mm.
Food for thought. Thank you very much. That
Thank
that was
you.
expansive. Thank you. There's, there's another question here that says, what strategies do you use, maybe just a few of them, to foster collaboration and teamwork among your employees in time of crisis? Because,
Okay.
especially, maybe I should add this to it. If a team probably wasn't working well together and things were just being patched up before crisis and crisis suddenly hits, what do you do as a leader?
Mm. So again, this is a great question, and it is one of those things that brings us squarely back into what I said, that how you get through the crisis starts before the crisis.
Mm.
So making sure your teams are working is key. and you are a big part of that. The way your organization culture, you are the one that, in a sense, shapes and models it the most. The things that you allow, the things that you disallow, the things that you yourself project, what kind of interventions you have for your people, like you said, to bring them together. So whether it is as little as, or it's not even little, that's a huge one, having regular TGIF type of interventions, the way you celebrate birthdays, the way you do learning sessions and interactions, creating cross-functional teams. If you create systems whereby in your teams, for instance, is the most junior person that is the chair of the team, the way you embrace the ideas, how do you deal with what do your policies say about, when you start having interpersonal issues? How do you deal with that? Is it always strictly by policy, or is there some other way? So for
We want to use this opportunity to thank Mrs. Audrey Joe-Ezigbo for a fantastic session. You will agree with me that that session was enlightening, it was empowering, and we know that you were indeed blessed. And we look forward again to you being able to practicalize in your area of influence all what she has imparted in us today.